Hey everyone, tonight we are back talking about South Dakota, and we're going to be getting into the pros and the cons of South Dakota residency. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so please don't take this as financial advice. This is meant for entertainment purposes. If you could hit the like button, I would really appreciate it. I do put a bit of time and effort into these videos, so you hitting the like button, it shows YouTube that has potential to be on YouTube, so that would really mean a lot to me. Also, if you consider subscribing, that would also help me out a lot. So let's dive right in. Now, in the last video, and you can go check that out, the last one I did on South Dakota residency, we established very clearly that South Dakota is by far the simplest to establish residency, domicile, what have you, among the three most popular states, which are Florida, Texas, South Dakota. Nevada is gaining popularity, and there's others, but I can't get all that in this video. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the pros and the cons, and I'm going to be making some comparisons to Florida because I think that it just sort of helps to illustrate where some of the strengths are compared to a state like Florida, because it brings in some of the really big issues. Now, the first one I want to talk about is healthcare. Healthcare can be a really big one, and I will say that with South Dakota, healthcare is probably not going to be the strength of South Dakota, because what the strength with Florida is this is healthcare that you can use in lots of different states. So that is a definite plus for Florida. Another downfall of South Dakota is that it can be far away. So if you have your health care in South Dakota, then you're going to have to be traveling to South Dakota to use your health insurance. And I know of some people who very successfully make this work. They've done very well for themselves, and they have a routine where they actually, something like once a year or whatever, they will travel to South Dakota, their domicile state, and they will utilize their health care services. I just think that is fine, it sounds like, for preventative care or any kind of planned health care. But I think it's important to realize that a very good portion of the year, you're going to be facing snowy weather, cold weather that could prevent you from accessing your care in South Dakota. So that could be a problem. I know that a lot of insurances may cover you for catastrophic situations, but it is something to be aware of. And kind of an overarching theme that you're going to see in this video is that some of the benefits of South Dakota, they're such great benefits, does not necessarily mean that they're accessible. It's almost like you just can't have it all. but let's get into it, because I have to say, South Dakota, it is a lot less expensive. Florida, for example, the car insurance is extremely high. It's really expensive to have your car insurance in Florida, and South Dakota just steals it. When it comes to car insurance, it is very inexpensive in South Dakota. The rates are tremendously lower, and that is a huge plus, and I love that. And it's, because there aren't as many people, it's more sparse. With that, we need to talk about if you live in a car and you don't live in an RV. Because if you live in an RV, it's going to be a much better laid out plan for you, because you can take advantage of those awesome low rates, because you'll be insuring your vehicle as an RV. And with that, the insurance company, they already know what you're doing. They know that they know that you're traveling. But if you're trying to do this with a car, it can get a little bit sticky, because most car insurance companies, at least that I've experienced, they want you to stay at least 6 months in one state. And basically you're making this assumption that you're living in South Dakota when you might never even be in South Dakota. So this is something where you're going to have to make that call on your own. In my case, this is going back to the theme. I never even got South Dakota insurance because I just kind of got a little bit too scared about it. I got kind of a weak stomach on it. I do come from a family of lawyers. Maybe that's part of it. With the South Dakota car insurance, I was actually advised through a Residency Center, and this was somebody just out of the kindness of his heart giving me some advice, because it was clear I didn't have an RV and I was trying to navigate all of this. And he recommended that if I was going to do the car insurance through South Dakota, that I should do this online, and not through a representative, and I'm thinking that would be to field certain questions. So we could get into a whole discussion about the legalities of it, but it seems like this is going to be a more seamless process if you are an RVer, because there has been more work done ahead of you, more roads cleared than the car campers. There just is not that. I feel like the RV community has more of like a fallback, a community. There's been more legislation or more laws that, you know, protect them, or policies actually, with like RV insurance, where when you don't have that protection, if you're not insuring your vehicle as an RV, then, you know, it's almost like it's a little bit scary, in my opinion, to go in and be like, oh, I'm going to get these cheap rates, when it's like, can I even really technically be doing this? So that is a con. I think that's a con, because it's a pro, but it's also a con. And speaking of matters of conscience, there is the affidavit that you sign when you become a South Dakota resident. I'm not sure about Florida. If you know about this, could you put this in the comments below? I would really appreciate it. But I mentioned in the last video, when you become a resident of South Dakota, you have to sign at the DMV a document that says, I promise to return to South Dakota after all of my travels. And, you know, it's just, you sort of have to have in your mind, like, okay, like, am I really going to return? I mean, I don't know if it's really expecting that, you know, like set in stone what you're going to do, but I don't know. I sort of like to feel like I'm doing the right thing most of the time. And if I knew, like, straight up that, okay, look, I'm definitely not coming back here, then I don't know, that could sort of affect me a little bit. And so I don't know, that is something to keep in mind. I mean, if you're someone who, you know, just maybe like kind of overthinks things, then if this like interferes with like your peace of mind, then it is something to consider. And then just a whole other, you know, pro to South Dakota, which can help remedy some of these other issues, is that I think it's a pretty great state. I personally like South Dakota. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and it seems like there's kind of a lot of kind of like South Dakota, like, and I get a lot of that reaction, by the way. I'm going off on an exit ramp here, but I get so much like South Dakota. I mean, when I'm like selling clothes to Plato's Closet, or I'm showing my ID, I mean, you guys, like, I am not lying. Literally every time I get a reaction, unless I'm like in South Dakota. Even a couple states over, I get South Dakota. So you'll get the reaction. I think it is a good question to ask yourself. Could I feasibly return to South Dakota? Do I like South Dakota? And as I was saying, a lot of the videos, I think a major argument against South Dakota is that it's cold and that it's far away and it's difficult to access. And those are very true, especially when you're talking about healthcare. But then it's sort of like, okay, well, why not? I'm just throwing this out there, okay? Why not take it a step further? I mean, at some point, like, do some of you ever, and please say in the comments, do some of you full-timers, do you ever consider like a home base or buying land? I've been reading a lot about the idea of buying land and renting it out as a campsite. You know, that let's face it, like, the economy is just, things are not looking so good. I mean, do you ever kind of crave like a home base area? Maybe, like I said, like a cabin, something. Put down roots. And to be, you know, I like South Dakota. Like, I think that South Dakota is actually a really nice state. It is kind of like far away from a lot of places, but what I like about South Dakota is that it has, and I touched on this in the last video, is that there's the like eastern South Dakota and there's western South Dakota. And it's really cool because like the eastern side, you still have access to, I don't feel that far away from the East Coast. I mean, yes, it is far, but it's not, there's still like, it's only one time zone away, right? But by the time you get to the west side, I mean, like, you're like near like Wyoming. And I mean, that's like quite a lot of variation, in my opinion. I mean, when you're bordering Minnesota and Wyoming or Montana, geography lesson. I mean, I think that's like some considerable variation. And yeah, so I think that it's not totally out of the question. I've listened to some podcasts of people who I think they live in California, and they have relatives in Wisconsin. And so for them, it was a very natural decision to choose their domicile as full-time RVers in South Dakota. So the argument that, oh, it's so far away, it's so far out there, that isn't for everyone, because you can see how beautifully this has worked out for this family because look at it, they can travel back and forth, visit family. It works out great. And I think that you really should, when you think about your domicile state, I think that if it's somewhere that you really cannot stomach living, then you really should be questioning whether it should be your domicile state, because we don't know like what laws are going to change. Like we don't know what the future is going to bring. And I think that if it's somewhere you really is just off the table for just living there, then I really don't think that it should be considered a domicile state. And that's just my humble opinion. But I think we really do need to be realistic. I mean, if you look at some of my other videos, like what happened to me, my car broke down, and what if you get laid off from your online job and your car breaks down and you end up like in a certain place, and you never know what's going to happen. So I think we need to like be comfortable with like where we are and sort of plan for the future. So whatever that domicile state may be, but I think that South Dakota is not a bad place. So I think that with that, train of thought, you're going to want to be looking at other factors, because I don't believe that there's a right or wrong answer. It totally depends on who you are, where you are in life, what your priorities are. As somebody who's like, younger, I'm not on Medicare or anything, so I have to think more about, I guess I do have to consider some healthcare. So I don't have any like really serious conditions or anything, but I do have to like consider that. And like I said, that's one area where Florida is great, because it's like PPO, but you can use across the country. And I see that as a major asset. So I think that's great. But you've got to look at the different lifestyle things. I know a lot of people are really into homesteading these days, and I think homesteading is kind of a cool option. I don't know if like that's something I'll ever like totally want to do. South Dakota does not, I've done a bit of research on this. South Dakota does not typically rank extremely high on the homesteading list. So if that's something that, you're maybe you want to fall back on someday, where like, okay, to be able to grow our own food or do something like that, I think it's possible, but you're going to want to research like homesteading laws and also like homeschooling. I know if I ever have kids, or like, I don't know, like maybe like, in the future, if I ever like, I don't know, adopt a kid or do foster care, or I don't know, actually I can't do homeschool with foster care. But anyway, I know that like when I like think about the future, like, I don't know, homeschooling, I mean, that's a big one too. And so you'll want to, be aware that like some states, I think like maybe, I don't want to say it because I want to be sure of my facts before I put it out there. But some states rank higher with being good homeschooling states than others. So that's something that you'll want to consider. There's just so many really rich variables that go into this. I think that like not having a vehicle inspection, and something I just like I just love about these states is the lack of vehicle inspection. And it's not to say that like, oh, I'm against vehicle inspections and I think that they're terrible. I mean, but it is very burdensome when like it can be very burdensome to have a vehicle inspection when you're far away. I mean, these things come around, once a year. That comes around really quick, and it just, you can get pulled over for this stuff. And I don't like it. I don't like the vehicle inspection. It is a pain, and it's not always easy to get a vehicle inspection. I mean, when you're working full time, I had a terrible time. The last time I got my vehicle inspected, I had a terrible time trying to get inspected. It just seemed like I had to make appointments. They were always full. It's not always easy. And I mean, that's in Virginia. I don't know in other places, but like where I was from, I had a difficult time, and it can be a real hardship getting that vehicle inspection. It really can be, especially when you're traveling. So that's something that I love about those states. Another feature that I like about these states is the no state income taxes. And before I thought that's just something extra, that's great. But now I'm seeing that this is something that is going to be really important for travelers, nomads, particularly if you are working in states like right now. Well, I don't want to say what state I'm in, but let's just say you're working in a state and you need to pay taxes for the work you're doing in that state. Well, it's better to start off, I would think, in my case, with a state that does not have income tax, because I might already be paying taxes to a state, even though I'm not a resident of that state. There may be a state that says, hey, if you work here, for this long, like in a seasonal job or a work camp or who knows, any kind of temp job, you might need to pay them taxes. So if you're already coming from a state with state income tax, and then you go to another state to work, and then they're demanding you pay taxes. That's a little scary for me because, like, what if you end up having to pay taxes? Anyway, I don't know that much about it, but it just seems like it'd be a lot simpler and a lot safer to already from the get-go have a state with no income tax. Hopefully you won't have to pay any income tax to any state, but then at least if you go off and work in a state and you're bound to pay that state, at least you're not looking at paying like double taxes if that's possible, because that would be pretty rough. In the next video, we're going to be talking about another con of the South Dakota residency is some people, and I myself was sort of hitting the panic button here on some new legislation coming out. And we're going to talk about that in the next video. And also in the next video, we're going to answer the question, is South Dakota residency right for me? So I'm going to answer that question for you. I'm going to do my best to answer that question for you based on my unique circumstances in the next video. So I hope I'll see you for the next one. Thank you so much. Like, subscribe, share. Thank you. Bye.